Do not make these mistakes where most people doing, which like trying to increase their testosterone, but the problem is they're doing it wrong. The first is they get the vitamin D from the supplement. There's the problem where the vitamin D from the supplement will not be sulfurized, which basically sulfurization is really important. It's literally make the vitamin D from fat soluble vitamin to water soluble vitamin, which basically make your body easy to transport vitamin D throughout your whole body. And you only can get sulfurization process only from the sun. Literally, if you get the vitamin D from the supplement, it will not be sulfurized. It will not turn into a water soluble vitamins. Compared to the when you get the sun from when you get the vitamin D from the sun, which basically will sulfurize the vitamin D to fat soluble vitamins to water soluble vitamins. And probably you might think that if the only thing that the vitamin D can get is only sun, then how about the study that shows that you will have a skin issue, you will have a skin problem, skin cancer, all of that, sunburn. The problem with that is it only applies to the people who had like high amount of linoleic acids in their skin. And the thing is, most people have a linoleic acid in their skin. It is because most people consuming seed oil, vegetable oil, fruit oil, even grain fat, grain fat chicken, which basically there's a high amount of linoleic acid in their skin, in their meats, and also in the eggs too, especially the yolk. The problem with linoleic high amount of linoleic acids, which basically can be consumed in seed oil, vegetable, and other things, it is because they are double bonded, which basically they are prone to lipid peroxidation. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFA, has two or more double bonded, which basically they are really sensitive to the heat, air, and also oxygen. So basically, when you're consuming high amount of like linoleic acids that can be found like seed oil, vegetable oil, even though even like farm factory chicken, which basically the chicken are fed with grains, and also like normal eggs, which basically grain fed eggs. There's a high amount of linoleic acid. It is because the chickens are fed with grains, which basically grains are high in linoleic acids. The problem with that is the linoleic acid that you're consuming that is really high amount, which basically our genetic have been adapt linoleic acid maximum is like 4%, which basically grass fed beef have like 2%, and grain fed beef, even though the cows that eating grains, which basically high in linoleic acids, but the thing is they only have like 4% of linoleic acids, which we are adapted to, compared to the seed oil, which can be like 70%, like 70. The gap between 70 to the 4% of linoleic acid is huge. The reason is why the cow, even though the cow eating linoleic acid, eating grains, it is because cow is a ruminant animals, which basically there's a four chamber complex digestive system that can ferment the linoleic acids to turn into fatty acids that they are not turned to omega-6 fatty acid, which is really harmful in our body in high amount. Compared to the chicken, which are monogastric animals, they have like single chamber simple of digestive system, which basically they cannot ferment the linoleic acids. So to keep it simple, it is because cow was ruminant animals which can ferment the linoleic acid. Chicken are monogastric animals which they cannot. fermented lilic acids, and high amount of lilic acids can integrate in your cell membrane. So basically, you're consuming high amount of vegetable oil, seed oil, which most people are, even though grain fat chicken, grain fat eggs, and something like that, even though olive oil can be still like 20% of linoleic acid, which is still high than we are adapted to, which I talked earlier, we are adapted to like 4%. And when there's really high amount of like linoleic acid in your skin, literally, as I talked earlier, it's like double bonded, prone to lipid peroxidation. They're really sensitive to the heat. So basically, when you exposed to the sun, literally, the sun, like the heat from the sun literally oxidize your skin because your skin is literally built up of PUFA, which linoleic acids. That's the problem. That's why you get the skin issue, you got the skin cancer easily, you get sunburn easily. If you like consuming, if you like controlling the intake of linoleic acids, which basically you consuming high amount of like ruminant animals, then your skin will be no issue, which basically all your tissue are made of saturated fats, which basically only had like single bond, which basically really stable to the heat, which basically you will not being oxidized easily compared to the profile, which like two or more polyunsaturated fatty sorry, two or more double bonded compared to the saturated fats, which only had like only single bond, which they are really stable. So if you consuming high amount of like ruminant animals, you should not worry at all about the sun. And people always say that, well, should you like wearing sunscreen because to protecting the UV rays. The problem with that is the UV rays, which like ultraviolet rays, is like has been proven damaging in isolation. So what that means is it only damages your skin if you only like get 100% of UV rays. Like there's nothing more. So basically, all your skin get exposed to is like UV rays. This have been proven damaging. But if you look at the sun, the solar radiation spectrum of the sun has like only 5% of ultraviolet, which UV, and 42% is like visible light, and 53% is like infrared, which red light. So basically, sun mostly is red light, not like UV rays. As I talked earlier, UV rays only been proven damaging in isolation, which basically you only exposed to the UV rays. But to the sun mostly is red light, and also like only 5% is UV, which basically there's like very small amount. But the thing is, why you should not worry about the sun, it is because suns can upregulate your collagen and also like regulates your collagen and elastin your skin, which is really great for the skin because mostly of the sun is red light. And also red light also helping your environment, helping your lightning environment, which basically is set your dopamine cycling, set your melatonin cycling, which basically helps your sleep. So basically, you should not worry about the sun at all. It, and you should not wearing sunscreen because there's a lot of like toxic chemicals. The UV rays that everybody's so worried about, this only have been proven damaging in isolation. Like I already talked this a lot, which basically the sun mostly is like red light, 53% of it. Only 5% is UV rays. the the people who should like worry about the sun is literally the people who had like consuming high amount of like seed oil, vegetable oil, and also specifically consuming high amount of linoleic acids, which omega-6 fatty acids in high amount. And this number one, you should get the vitamin D specifically from the sun. Do not rely on the dietary. It is because especially like modern foods really deficient in vitamin D. And if you live in high latitudes, if you live in like northern area, for example, it's like Canada, Sweden, and also like Greenland, which basically you want to get the vitamin D, to boost the testosterone thing. But the thing is, your area is a cold environment, which basically the sun exposure is not like the UV rays. It's not like in high amount, which basically you are not getting the concentration of the sun in high amount compared to the people who live in the equator. For example, like Indonesian, like Asian country, right? The middle of the earth. The people who live in the high latitudes, which basically, in cold environment, there's a lot of like snow, you know what I'm saying, right? Which basically that type of people, if they want to getting a vitamin D, they should get from dietary from the fatty fish, which basically like salmon, sardine, and also like mackerel. They're really like really rich in vitamin D. Even though I already talked that modern foods are really deficient in vitamin D and you only get vitamin D from the sun, but the thing is this not are suitable for all person, which basically the people who live in northern area, the people who live in high latitudes, they aren't like gonna get like sun exposure in high amount because they are in live in cold environment compared to the people who live in equator. So so the people who live in high latitudes like Canada, Greenland, and Sweden, they mostly have to rely on dietary. So basically they have to get the vitamin D from the foods, specifically fatty fish which are rich in vitamin D. But make sure it is like wild caught. It is because when you're consuming farm fatty fish like salmon, like farm factory salmon, they're consuming like grains, like soy or corn, which basically high in linoleic acids, which still can integrate in your cell membrane. But the thing is, the high latitudes area, specifically they are like in cold environment. So even though you eat a lot of like fatty fish, to get the vitamin D, the problem with fatty fish is like high in polyunsaturated fatty acids and also high in monounsaturated fatty acids, which basically both of them like double bond, which I talked earlier. Double bond is really sensitive to the heat, air, and oxygen. They're really easily oxidized. But the people who live in high latitudes, they are in cold environment. So basically they are not being oxidized by the sun because the environment is cold. So basically there's no like high heat which basically can oxidize your skin because you eat a lot of like PUFA. You eat a lot of like linoleic acids which can be found in fatty fish even though it's wild caught. But the thing is, you get the vitamin D from the fatty fish, and also at the same time, you get a lot of like polyunsaturated fatty acids, linoleic acids, which basically prone to lipid peroxidation, really easily oxidize. But the problem is, you live in the cold environment, so there's no worries about that. So if you live in equator, get the vitamin D from the sun, it will sufferize it. But if you live in the high latitudes, like northern area, Canada, Sweden, Greenland, something like that, you only get the vitamin D from the fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardine, and so on. That's the number one, which the vitamin D guide to boost your testosterone correctly. The second is A lot of people say they get the zinc from the vegetable, from the plant's foods. For example, like spinach has zinc, pumpkin seed has zinc. Yeah, maybe it will lead to high testosterone state, to get the zinc. But the problem is the zinc that you get from the spinach and also from the pumpkin seed is like low bioavailable form, which basically the bioavailable of the zinc will be reduced due to the anti-nutrients. For example, in pumpkin seed and also like spinach has fatty acids which can bind, which fatty acid is a mineral magnet, which can bind the minerals like iron, magnesium, and also zinc. Because fatty acid has a strong negative charge, and minerals like magnesium, potassium, zinc, iron has a strong positive charge, and they will bind. They work like a magnet. So basically, the bioavailable of the zinc will be reduced compared to the zinc when you're like getting from the ruminant animals. Is far more nutritious in every single way compared to the you get the zinc, which in spinach and also like pumpkin seed. And the problem is like spinach, it has like oxalate, which basically it can bound the calcium, which basically 80% of kidney stones are literally comes from oxalate calcium stone, which basically they comes from oxalates. Our body needs calcium. Don't cut out calcium, but our body doesn't need oxalates. So basically, if you look at the holistic mechanism, the spinach and also like pumpkin seed, even though they have a zinc, which is very conducive to high testosterone, but the thing is, if you look in overall in holistic mechanism, they also can build up your thyroid oxalate crystal, which basically can cause like autoimmune disease like Hashimoto thyroiditis, and also kidney stones, build up your brain, build up your eyes, which basically can make you blind. The oxalate crystal bind the wiring in your retina, which basically can cause you blind. There's no reason for doing that. And also pumpkin seed has a cyanogenic glycosides, which are bioavailable of cyanide when broken down. So basically cyanide is a things that make your body, make your tissue, make your body cell absorb less oxygen. So basically your organ, your brain, your heart, they need a lot of oxygen. But basically when you're like consuming pumpkin seed, which have a cyanogenic glycoside, which broken down into a cyanide, which make your heart, make your organ less absorb oxygens. And it could be like dangerous in high amount. And there's no reason for doing that. So basically if you get a pumpkin seed, they have zinc. But in holistic mechanism, there are a lot of like negative things, mostly, and you can get the positive things like for example zinc and other like essential nutrients from the beef, which basically we are adapted to eating it. We have been exposed to meat for like 4.5 million years ago. According to the Darwinian principle of evolution, according to the biological genetic adaptation, that shows that we are being adapted to eating high amount of like ruminant animals with like flesh and fat. So why choose like vegetable and also like pumpkin seed and also like plant food which like this is destitute of like 26 compounds that are essential or beneficial. For example, it's like carnosine, carnitine, creatine, taurine, EPA, DHA, choline, conjugated linoleic acids, the active form of B6, methylated B12, biotin, selenium, vitamin A, D3, K2, and a lot more. So yeah, so basically the high testosterone guide is literally get the vitamin D from the sun. if you live in the equator, like Indonesian, like the middle of the earth. If you live in the high latitudes, which basically in high in high place, which basically it covers in snow, it's like cold environment. You should get the vitamin D from the fatty fish. And specifically if you get the zinc, the minerals, which basically from the plant foods, specifically, you should get from the ruminant animals, flesh and fat, rather than vegetable, which basically has a lot of like anti-nutrients and also like plant toxin. There's no reason for doing that. I mean, that's it. Hope it's really valuable. If you kind of like scramble, you just like repeat the video, which basically you can do your own research what I'm talking about here. So yeah, thanks for watching. Peace. If your goal is to being attractive, it's literally you have to being healthy first. It is because you want to fix your skin issues, you want to fix your body fat. It just all relies on the diet mostly. And it is because if you have a lot of problems, for example, is you want to trying to eat carnivore diet, but the thing is your parents like against you. They say cholesterol is really bad. They say that saturated is really bad. Even though there's a new study that shows that it's really crucial and it is essential and there's no problem in high amount. So all the problems I will solve there, and all my nutrition guide I will support you. Link the description below where I have a guide that teach you all the knowledge you need and also solve all the problems which basically that hinder your goals to achieve the to being optimally healthy in the diet. So link in the description below.